Summer, 1978. In the quiet town of Maple Falls, Ohio, two young children vanished in broad daylight, disappearing from the very park where families felt safest. There were no cries for help, no witnesses, no clues. Only minutes passed, and two small lives seemed to be carried away by the wind. How could two children simply disappear from the most ordinary place at the most ordinary time? Life moved slowly between the paper mill, the post office, and the rows of neat little houses that lined Elm Street. Families gathered at the town's Central Park every afternoon, a patch of green that everyone believed was the safest place in town. On Wednesday, June 14th, Karen Miller brought her 3-year-old son, Ethan, to that park. Ethan was a bright-eyed boy with pale blonde hair and a small stuffed bear named Rusty that he carried everywhere. The day was warm, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass and gasoline from passing lawn mowers. Karen sat on a wooden bench, watching her son play by the slide, his laughter mixing with the hum of cicadas and the faint pop music drifting from a nearby transistor radio. Around 4:30, Ethan pointed toward the ice cream truck parked near the gate. Karen promised him a cone and walked the short distance to buy one, asking a friend sitting nearby to keep an eye on him. It was no more than 10 minutes. When she turned back, Ethan was gone. At first, she thought he had simply run to another part of the playground. She called his name once, twice, louder each time. A few parents joined in, scanning the swings, the sandbox, the grassy field. Someone said they had seen the boy a minute earlier near the fence, holding his bear. Now the bear was there alone, lying on the ground with one ear pressed into the dust. Panic spread quietly at first. Then, all at once, a man at the drinking fountain ran to call the police. Within an hour, the small park was surrounded by officers from the Maple Falls Police Department, led by Chief Raymond Cole, a man who had worked the town beat for more than 20 years, but had never handled a missing child case. They searched the park inch by inch, through the trees, behind the restrooms, even inside the trash bins. The fire department sent volunteers to check the creek that ran behind the baseball field. Nothing. A dog team arrived from a neighboring county. The scent trail stopped at the north fence, near the parking lot. Beyond that point, there was nothing at all. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, no one who saw a child being carried away. By sunset, the park was empty, except for a few officers still combing the grass with flashlights. Karen sat on the bench where she had last seen her son, holding Rusty in her lap. Chief Cole spoke gently, asking about what Ethan had been wearing. A striped blue and white t-shirt, tan shorts, red sandals, a 5-cent coin in his pocket. She remembered him showing it to her that morning. The next morning's Maple County Times printed a small headline, "Local Boy Missing, Police Seek Leads." The article was brief, only a few lines about a search that had yielded nothing. People in town spoke of it in whispers, convinced the child would be found within a day or two. But the days passed, and no one came forward. Helicopters flew over the woods that bordered the highway. Divers checked the ponds outside town. Each new search ended the same way. No evidence, no ransom note, no witnesses. A teenager mentioned seeing a blue van parked near the fence that afternoon, but he couldn't remember the license plate. Others thought they might have heard an engine start, a door slam, but no one could say for sure. By the end of the week, the investigation had turned into something darker, not a search for a lost child, but a case file. The bear named Rusty was sealed in a plastic bag marked Evidence. The report, numbered 78 MEF 414, carried a short final line beneath the summary of the day's events. Victim, Ethan Miller. Status, missing, unresolved. After that summer afternoon, the laughter in Maple Falls Park never sounded quite the same, and from that day forward, no one ever saw Ethan Miller again. The news of Ethan Miller's disappearance spread through Maple Falls before dawn broke the next morning. In a town that small, a single rumor could move faster than any police report. By 6 a.m., people were already gathered near the park gate, some carrying flashlights, others holding paper cups of coffee. It wasn't panic, not yet. It was disbelief. Everyone knew everyone in Maple Falls. The thought that a child could simply vanish from a playground in the middle of the afternoon didn't fit into the world they thought they lived in. Chief Raymond Cole had never led a missing child operation. He was 52, a man known for his quiet discipline, more used to mediating neighbor disputes than organizing searches. But by sunrise, he had assembled every available officer from the Maple Falls Police Department, all 12 of them, and requested immediate assistance from the State Patrol and the County Sheriff's Office. The park was sealed off. Yellow tape stretched between the light poles, fluttering in the wind. Firefighters from the volunteer station set up base at the gazebo. The rescue squad began mapping out a radius extending 1 mile in every direction, dividing the area into search grids. Groups of residents volunteered to walk the fields beyond the creek, while others combed through the thick pine woods east of town. The search continued for hours. By noon, the temperature had risen to nearly 90 degrees, and the air smelled of resin and dust. People moved methodically, side by side, scanning the ground for any sign: a footprint, a piece of fabric, a toy. When they came across a bottle cap or a torn candy wrapper, they stopped and marked the spot with small red flags, though none of it led anywhere. A helicopter from the Ohio State Patrol hovered above, circling slowly, its shadow crossing the rooftops and the empty baseball field. From that height, Maple Falls looked smaller than ever. Rows of modest homes, the old paper mill chimney, the single steeple of St. Mary's Church. Somewhere in all that, they hoped, was a clue. But the sky offered nothing back. As the first day turned to the second, the search widened. Divers swept the town's reservoir, a dark, still body of water that supplied half the county. The woods beyond the industrial park were raked and sifted. Even the storm drains were checked. Chief Cole kept a growing list of leads on his desk, none of them solid. Each name, each phone number ended the same way. Negative result. By the third day, frustration began to creep in. Reporters from Columbus arrived, turning the quiet corner of the park into a media scene. The Maple County Times ran a headline across the front page: "Child disappears in broad daylight." The paper described the search as the largest in the county's history. Beside the article was Ethan's photograph: blonde hair, soft features, and a small smile frozen in time. The public wanted answers faster than the police could find them. Speculation filled the silence. Some believed it was a stranger who had driven through town. Others whispered about broken homes, custody battles, dark secrets. When people don't have facts, they invent their own. Karen Miller became the center of both sympathy and suspicion. She was questioned repeatedly, not because evidence pointed toward her, but because protocol demanded it. Detectives asked about her marriage, about Ethan's father who worked construction out of state. They checked her phone records, her bank account, her neighbors. Nothing in her background suggested neglect or abuse. She was exactly what she appeared to be: a working mother who had lost her only child in the span of a few minutes. Still, the rumors spread. At the diner on Main Street, someone said she'd been drinking the day it happened. Others swore they'd seen a man in a blue van parked near the fence just before Ethan vanished. A teenage boy confirmed that part. He'd seen the van too, with its rear window covered by a sheet of paper or cardboard. He couldn't remember the license plate. He only recalled the sound of the engine starting, a heavy door slamming, and then silence. The police traced every blue van registered within 30 miles. There were dozens. One belonged to a traveling salesman from Dayton, another to a delivery driver for a bakery, a third to a retired mechanic who rarely left his property. Each was interviewed, each cleared. The lead went nowhere. Meanwhile, the volunteers kept searching. On the 7th day, a group found a small sandal by the creek. For a moment, hope and dread mixed in the same breath. Karen was brought in to look at it. It wasn't Ethan's. That night, for the first time, Chief Cole allowed himself to admit the unspoken thought that had been following him since the first evening. If a child isn't found within the first 72 hours, the odds begin to fall sharply. Inside the police station, a map of the town was pinned to the wall, covered with colored strings showing every route, every area searched. It looked less like an investigation and more like a spider's web, dense, tangled, and empty at the center. The community tried to keep its spirit. Churches held vigils, candles lined the park fence. Teachers at the local elementary school organized safety meetings for parents. Still, the sense of innocence that had defined Maple Falls was gone. Every parent kept their child closer. Every stranger was watched twice. By the second week, the case began to lose momentum. The search teams dwindled. The reporters moved on to other stories. What remained was paperwork. The thick, gray weight of it that builds up when the trail runs cold. The file on Chief Cole's desk grew heavier each day. Witness statements, hand-drawn maps, photographs of the park from every angle. None of it added up. On June 27th, the official classification changed. The words were typed on a single sheet and filed under case number 78, MUF4414. Status: missing person, juvenile, unresolved. For Karen Miller, the phrase meant nothing. She still came to the station every morning asking if there was news. The officers didn't have the heart to tell her there wasn't. After 2 weeks, the active search was suspended. The yellow tape was taken down, and the park reopened to the public. Children returned to the swings and slides, though their laughter sounded quieter now, as if the whole town had learned to lower its voice. The official record shows the search for Ethan Miller as lasting 14 days. Unofficially, it never really ended. Even years later, whenever a child's cry echoed through the park, or a small figure disappeared behind a tree, someone would pause and look twice, just to be sure. By the time September came, summer in Maple Falls had started to fade. The days were shorter, the air cooler, and the park, once full of laughter, had grown strangely quiet. Parents still brought their children, but never let them out of sight. The memory of Ethan Miller's disappearance 3 months earlier still lingered like a shadow that refused to lift. It was Saturday, September 2nd, 1978, a clear afternoon just before Labor Day weekend. Linda Turner, a 28-year-old elementary school teacher, decided to take her son, Michael, not yet 2 years old, for a short walk to the park. She lived just 3 blocks away, in a modest brick duplex where she'd grown up herself. Her husband worked the late shift at a nearby auto plant. Michael was a cheerful child, round-faced with sandy hair that curled slightly at the ends. He was just learning to string words together and carried a small red toy truck everywhere. That day he wore a yellow romper with white trim and a pair of soft sneakers that squeaked when he walked. The park looked ordinary, almost too ordinary, when they arrived around 4 o'clock. The same swings, the same wooden slide, the same small sandbox near the old maple tree. The same place where Ethan Miller had vanished 12 weeks earlier. For a moment, Linda hesitated. She had avoided the park all summer, but the weather was too fine, and she told herself she couldn't live in fear forever. Michael toddled toward the sandbox, where 2 older children, a boy and a girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, were playing. They asked if he could join. Linda smiled politely and said she'd rather he stayed close. but the children were persistent, promising to share their toys. Eventually, she agreed, telling them to be gentle. Linda sat on the bench beside the sandbox. After a few minutes, a man she didn't recognize approached and sat at the far end of the same bench. He looked to be in his early 40s, medium build, dark hair, a faint scar running across his left wrist. He wore a tan jacket despite the warm weather and carried a canvas bag folded at his side. He started a conversation, nothing alarming at first. He asked how old Michael was, whether she lived nearby, and then, oddly, began talking about those kidnappings you keep hearing about on the news. His tone was casual, but his words unsettled her. He said the world was getting crazy, that no one's kids were safe anymore. Linda nodded politely, trying to end the exchange. The man laughed softly, rubbed his wrist, and stared out at the playground. A few minutes later, Linda turned her head toward the street, distracted by the sound of a car backfiring across the road. When she looked back, Michael was gone. At first, she thought he had simply crawled behind the sandbox. She stood, calling his name. The two older children looked up, startled. The little boy said, "He was just here. We left him in the sand." Linda ran around the playground, scanning every corner. Panic rose in her throat. The bench was empty. The man with the scar had disappeared. Within minutes, the scene from June repeated itself. Someone called the police, and Chief Cole arrived again, disbelief written on his face. He had seen this once before, in the same place, and now it was happening again. The park was sealed off, and officers fanned out in every direction. The search that evening was even larger than the one for Ethan Miller. They worked under floodlights until midnight, searching the woods, the creek, the nearby streets. Nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no sign of a struggle. It was as if the child had simply been lifted out of the air. The next morning, the Maple County Times carried the headline in bold letters, "Another child missing. Second case in same park." The article was brief but grim, repeating that police had no suspects. For the first time, the town began to lose its sense of safety. Parents kept their children indoors. Teachers at the school where Linda worked set up a rotation to escort students to and from class. Linda herself was in shock. She gave a full statement to the police, describing the man she had met. Dark hair, early 40s, average height, scar on his left wrist, wearing a tan jacket and carrying a large cloth bag. The police circulated the description statewide. Several people claimed they might have seen someone similar at a bus stop or a grocery store, but the leads faded one by one. Then came a small but chilling report. A woman walking her dog that afternoon said she saw a man matching that same description leaving the park around 4:15, carrying what looked like a large beige canvas bag. She assumed it held picnic items or sports equipment. When she saw the newspaper the next day, she called the police. That detail, the bag, became the focus of the investigation. Officers combed the surrounding area, searching dumpsters, alleys, and the highway leading out of town. They found nothing. No one else had noticed the man. No security cameras existed in the park or the nearby shops. For the next several days, the entire county was on alert. The state police issued bulletins to nearby towns, asking for information about anyone resembling the unidentified man. Gas stations, motels, and rest stops kept flyers at their counters. Truck drivers were asked to report any suspicious activity along Route 34, the highway that ran past Maple Falls. Every rumor, every fragment of information was followed, but the results were the same. No trace of Michael Turner. As the days passed, Maple Falls changed. Parents who had once gathered for afternoon coffee now kept their blinds drawn. Children played only in backyards, under watchful eyes. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was resignation. The park that had been the heart of the town had become a place people avoided, a reminder of two boys who had vanished under an open sky. Chief Cole worked the case relentlessly. He met with FBI consultants, requested behavioral profiles, reviewed every interview from June to September. The similarities were undeniable. Both disappearances occurred in daylight, in the same park, around 4 in the afternoon. Both children were blonde, under 3 years old. Both had been near other children when they disappeared. And in both cases, there had been an adult male nearby who vanished at the same time. But the trail was already cold. Without photographs, witnesses, or forensic evidence, there was nothing to hold on to. The man with the scar became an outline in a report, a ghostly figure known only by description. His name, if anyone ever knew it, was lost to time. By mid-September, the search for Michael Turner was suspended. The yellow tape came down again, and the park reopened for the second time that year. The swings creaked in the wind, and the sandbox remained empty. When Linda walked past the park weeks later, she said the place felt smaller, as if it had folded in on itself. The laughter that once echoed there was gone, replaced by silence and the faint rattle of the chains on the swings. The official file added a new number, Case 78 MF0902, Victim, Michael Turner, 20 months. Status, missing, unresolved. 2 boys. One summer, the same park, and once again, no one had seen a thing. By late September of 1978, Maple Falls no longer felt like the same town. The sound of children playing in the park had been replaced by silence, and every rustle in the trees drew uneasy glances. 2 boys had vanished in the same summer, both under the age of 3, both in daylight, both from the same small playground in the center of town. For Chief Raymond Cole and his team, the similarities could no longer be ignored. The first step was comparison. The files for Ethan Miller and Michael Turner were laid side by side on the long oak table inside the police station's back office. It was a narrow room with faded maps on the walls and the faint smell of coffee that never left. Cole read through each line again. The time, the location, the witnesses, the descriptions. Every column seemed to mirror the other. Both incidents had occurred between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, on clear, sunny days. Both children had been playing within a few yards of their mothers. Each had been momentarily unsupervised for less than 5 minutes. In both cases, other children were present, older, perhaps 6 to 8 years old, and both mothers remembered a nearby adult male who disappeared at the same time as their sons. There were no ransom notes, no signs of struggle, no trace of the missing boys. The press called it the Maple Falls pattern. Reporters who had left town after the first disappearance came back, cameras in hand, asking if the police believed a single person was responsible. Chief Cole refused to speculate publicly, but privately, he admitted to his deputies that coincidence no longer seemed likely. A week after Michael's disappearance, another small clue resurfaced: the blue van. 3 independent witnesses had mentioned seeing a similar vehicle near the park on both occasions: a faded blue Ford Econoline, older model, with a missing hubcap and something covering the rear window. One woman described a bumper sticker that might have been peeled away, leaving only the word fish. The police traced every blue van registered in the county. They found 47. One belonged to a retired teacher, another to a plumbing company, one to a man who delivered newspapers along Route 34. That last owner drew attention briefly. He drove the van daily past the park to make his afternoon deliveries, but his logs showed he was miles away at the time of both disappearances. Several residents confirmed seeing him on the other side of town. The lead was ruled out. Still, the coincidence was too strong to ignore. The reports were pinned to the map in Chief Cole's office with red pushpins, the same small circle marking both incidents. 2 boys, 1 park, he murmured more than once. Somebody planned this. In early October, Cole met with investigators from the state police. Together they reviewed regional missing person reports from the previous 5 years. None matched the details of Maple Falls. No other cases of small children vanishing in daylight without witnesses. The pattern seemed isolated, self-contained, and that somehow made it even more disturbing. When the leads ran out, Cole began to consider motives. What kind of person would take a child without demanding money, without leaving a message, without any trace of violence? That question led him to a troubling theory, one he hesitated to say out loud. During a late-night meeting with the county prosecutor, Cole finally voiced it. Perhaps the children hadn't been taken for ransom or harm, but for possession, for someone who wanted a child of their own. In other words, an illegal adoption. The idea wasn't new. Similar cases in other states had suggested the existence of informal networks, individuals or small groups who stole infants and toddlers to sell to desperate couples unable to adopt legally. No one had ever proved such a ring operated in Ohio, but the possibility existed. Cole's words were simple. Maybe someone wanted them alive. When that theory reached the newspapers, it set off a wave of arguments. Social workers and adoption agencies condemned the speculation, saying there was no evidence of trafficking rings in small towns like Maple Falls. The Maple County Times ran an editorial insisting that the police were grasping at shadows. But among the residents, the story found an audience. It was easier to believe the boys were alive somewhere than to imagine the darker alternatives. The town's churches held special services. Candles were lit under the gazebo at the park, now a makeshift shrine. Posters of Ethan and Michael hung on the fences, their baby faces fading slowly under the sun. People stopped there when walking their dogs or heading home from work, pausing just long enough to whisper a prayer before moving on. Behind the scenes, the investigation continued, but every lead ended in silence. The man with the scarred wrist was never identified. The blue van sightings were too vague to confirm. The older children who had played with both boys were re-interviewed, yet their stories remained unchanged. They remembered sand, laughter, a brief distraction, and then nothing. By November, the case files grew thicker while the evidence stayed thin. The town's sense of order, once solid, had begun to crack. Parents walked their children to school in pairs. Windows stayed locked, even in broad daylight. Businesses near the park reported fewer visitors. Fear, once temporary, had become a way of life. On December 1st, Chief Cole held a short press conference inside the courthouse lobby. The statement was brief. After months of exhaustive investigation, we have found no evidence linking either disappearance to any known suspect. Both cases remain open and active. Reporters asked if he believed the two were connected. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Yes, he said finally. Connected, but not yet explained. That was the last public update the town received for years. The files were marked as related and stored side by side under a single heading. The Maple Falls cases. No one was arrested. No new clues appeared. Winter came, and the snow covered the playground, softening its edges, hiding the sand where two boys had once played. Parents kept their children indoors, and the laughter that had once echoed across the park faded into memory. Maple Falls had become a town that waited, not for answers, perhaps, but for something to believe in. Time passed quietly in Maple Falls, though the town was never quite the same. By the spring of 1979, the posters had come down from the telephone poles, and the park's yellow tape had long been replaced by children's laughter that tried, without success, to sound normal again. Life went on, as it always does. but beneath that rhythm ran a silence no one dared to name. Karen Miller moved away first. The memories had become too heavy. The grocery store where Ethan once begged for candy. The post office where everyone avoided her eyes. She packed up and left for Columbus, but she left one room behind. In the old Miller house on Elm Street, Ethan's bedroom remained untouched. The same small bedspread with rocket ships, the same wooden shelf with picture books lined in order, the same stuffed bear, Rusty, sitting upright in the corner chair. She asked her sister, who bought the house, never to change it. "He might come back one day," she said, "and I want him to know it's still his room." Linda Turner stayed. She continued teaching at Maple Falls Elementary, walking to school each morning past the same park where her son had vanished. Every year, on September 2nd, she returned to the sandbox with a handful of wild daisies, the kind Michael used to pick for her in their yard, and place them under the old maple tree. She never stayed long. Just a few minutes, long enough to whisper a prayer, then walk home before the sun set. Over time, the flowers became a quiet ritual that others began to recognize. Some years she wasn't alone. Parents she had once taught came and stood a few steps behind, saying nothing. For nearly 6 years, no new evidence appeared. The files grew brittle with age. Paperclips rusted. Ink faded. Chief Cole retired in 1983, his successor a younger man who had never known the park without its weight of sadness. He reopened the case once, hoping for something missed the first time. A witness, a scrap of clothing, a confession. But there was nothing new to find. Then, in 1985, the phone rang in the Maple County Sheriff's Office. A woman from Grand Rapids, Michigan, claimed she had seen a young man who looked exactly like the age-progressed sketch of Ethan Miller published years earlier. She said he was working at a car wash and had a small scar on his left knee, just as Ethan's records described. Investigators drove north, interviewed the man, and obtained a blood sample. The results took a week. It wasn't a match. The man was 23, not 20. His name was Aaron Keller. Another lead folded and filed away. Later that same year, another tip arrived. An anonymous call made to the local police just after midnight. The caller's voice was male, shaky. He claimed that Michael Turner's body had been buried in an abandoned storage shed behind the old grain depot. The officers were cautious, but hopeful. By dawn, they had assembled a search team, digging through the dirt floor of the crumbling building. They found nothing. The call was traced to a payphone near the highway, and whoever made it was never identified. These false starts became routine. Brief flickers of hope, followed by silence. Every rumor was checked, every letter read, every phone call logged. The missing person notices were updated twice during the 1980s, each time with age-progressed sketches drawn by hand before computer imaging existed. The drawings were hopeful but vague, faces of boys who might have been anyone's sons. Then came a strange report in 1990. State police in Pennsylvania arrested a man involved in the illegal sale of newborns. During interrogation, he mentioned, almost offhand, that years earlier someone had approached him about finding 2 toddlers under the age of 3 from Ohio, back in '78. When asked who that someone was, he said he couldn't remember. Just a woman with money, he claimed. The statement was written down, sent to Maple County, and added to the growing folder labeled Possible Leads, External Sources. There was no way to prove the connection, but it echoed Chief Cole's old suspicion of a black market adoption ring. For a moment, hope flickered again. Detectives reached out to adoption agencies, hospitals, and child welfare offices in neighboring states. They found no irregular records, no missing paperwork, no unregistered adoptions that fit the time frame. The trail ended there, as it always did. By the early 1990s, the case was known among investigators simply as Maple Falls. New recruits were told the story during training, a reminder that not every question has an answer. The term cold case had become standard by then, and both files fit the definition perfectly. No suspects, no evidence, no movement in over a decade. Linda Turner aged quietly. She stopped teaching full-time, though she still volunteered to read to children at the library. Her students remembered her gentle voice, her calm patience. Few of them ever mentioned her son. Most didn't even know. When asked why she still lived in Maple Falls, she would smile faintly and say, "If he ever comes back, he'll know where to find me." Karen Miller visited occasionally, each time driving past the old house on Elm Street without stopping. She remarried, had another child, but she never spoke about Ethan in public. Her daughter once said she kept the boy's photo on her nightstand until the day she died. The park itself changed, though not much. The town replaced the old wooden slide with a new metal one, added a swing set, and planted 2 more maple trees near the fence. Yet no matter how bright the summer afternoons became, an unease remained, quiet but constant, like a story everyone knew but no one dared to retell. In 1995, after 17 years of unanswered questions, both case files were officially transferred to the Maple County Cold Case Room. The paperwork was boxed, labeled in black ink, and placed on the highest shelf beside other unsolved tragedies. The label read simply, "Ethan Miller, Missing Child, 1978. Michael Turner, Missing Child, 1978. Beneath it, one final line, "Status, inactive, pending new information." The file boxes gathered dust, and time moved on. But for the families left behind, the passing years did not bring closure, only distance. And in Maple Falls, people learned to live with the silence, even as the memory of 2 vanished boys continued to haunt every sunny afternoon that seemed, for a moment, too peaceful to trust. 3 decades had passed since the summer when 2 children vanished from a small-town park. By 2008, Maple Falls was quieter, smaller, and older. The paper mill had closed. The train no longer stopped at the depot. Many of those who remembered the disappearances had gray in their hair now, but memory, like dust, never truly settles. It only waits for someone to stir it. That year, the county sheriff's office announced that it was reopening the Maple Falls cases with assistance from the FBI. Advances in DNA technology and digital imaging had made it possible to re-examine old evidence that once seemed useless. Across the country, cold cases were being solved with tools that didn't exist in the 1970s. There was a feeling, small but stubborn, that maybe Maple Falls still had something left to give. The first step was age progression. FBI specialists used childhood photographs of Ethan Miller and Michael Turner to create images of what the boys might look like at 30 years old. The process was part science, part art, estimating bone structure, facial growth, and inherited features from their parents. When the results were complete, the faces were hauntingly lifelike. 2 men in their early 30s, with familiar eyes and faint smiles that could almost have belonged to anyone on a city street. The images were released to newspapers and television stations throughout the Midwest. For a few weeks, Maple Falls was back in the headlines. The Maple County Herald ran a feature titled, "30 Years Missing: The Faces of Ethan and Michael Today." People clipped the pictures and pinned them to bulletin boards or taped them to refrigerators, as if they might recognize the faces someday in a grocery store aisle. Leads trickled in. A woman in Minnesota claimed she had met a man who looked remarkably like the picture of Ethan Miller at a gas station near Duluth. He was polite, quiet, and traveling alone. Investigators followed up, contacting local authorities and checking nearby hotels. The man was never identified. another tip came from Illinois, where a truck driver said he'd seen a man with the same smile as the photo, but he could not recall when or where. Each lead, full of hope at first, dissolved into uncertainty. Still, the case files came alive again. Photographs spread across tables, evidence bags reopened, reports reread under better light. There was little physical material left to test. DNA collection had not existed in 1978, and most of the early evidence had degraded. The only remaining item from Ethan's case was his stuffed bear, Rusty. For years it had been sealed in plastic and stored in an evidence locker. Scientists examined it, hoping for stray hair or fibers, but after 30 years the fabric held nothing that could speak. New theories emerged as detectives reviewed the old interviews. One stood out, a suggestion that perhaps the person responsible had never left Maple Falls at all. Maybe the abductions were not the work of an outsider, but someone who lived quietly among them, unnoticed. It was an unsettling idea, and not everyone wanted to believe it. The sheriff, David Lang, a younger man who had been a child himself in 1978, gathered his team in the same cramped office where Chief Cole once worked. "If it was a stranger," he said, "we'd have found him by now. Maybe we should be looking closer to home." They revisited every name from the original witness lists. Neighbors, maintenance workers, even the teenagers who had volunteered during the searches. Most had moved away. Some had passed on. A few were still there, living ordinary lives. One of them was Frank Dyer, the man who had operated the ice cream truck in the park that summer. He was 75 now, retired and living alone. When officers came to speak with him, he was cooperative, almost relieved to talk about it. He remembered something, he said. Something small but strange. In the fall of 1980, 2 years after the boys had disappeared, he had visited a flea market in a nearby town. There, among a pile of trinkets, he saw a silver wristwatch engraved with the initials EM. He hadn't thought much of it then, assuming it was coincidence, but when the case resurfaced years later, the memory came back. Investigators searched through pawn records and antique shop ledgers, trying to trace the watch. Nothing surfaced. No receipts, no registration, no sign that the item had ever existed beyond Dyer's recollection. But the mention of it, the possibility that something once belonging to Ethan had been in circulation, was enough to reignite the imagination of the investigators. In the following months, teams conducted interviews, ran background checks, and combed through databases for any related crimes from the late 70s to the early 80s. Every thread seemed to end the same way. Too faint, too frayed to hold. The world had changed too much. Witnesses had aged, memories had blurred, evidence had disappeared in the slow erosion of time. By winter, the momentum had faded. The FBI agents returned to their other assignments, and the Maple Falls files were returned to the county archive. At a final meeting, Sheriff Lang stood before the small group of officers who had spent a year chasing ghosts. On the table lay the 2 folders, edges worn, names written in fading ink. He rested his hand on them for a long moment before speaking. "These cases don't need much," he said quietly. "Just one piece, a photo, a name, a single fragment that connects then to now. One man-gep." He paused, his voice low. "But that piece was lost a long time ago, somewhere between the years." And with that, the Maple Falls investigation slipped back into stillness once more. Outside, the town moved through another quiet winter. The park, blanketed in snow, stood empty again, its swings frozen mid-air, its sandbox buried, the echoes of 2 small boys fading into the cold air of another year that had promised answers and delivered only silence. By the time the year 2020 arrived, Maple Falls had become the kind of town most people passed without noticing. The paper mill was a shell now, its brick walls covered in vines. The old depot had been turned into a cafe that served travelers on their way to larger places. To a stranger, it looked like any quiet Ohio town. Orderly streets, tidy lawns, and nothing remarkable to speak of. Only the locals knew that beneath its calm surface, the town still carried two missing names that time had refused to erase. That winter, a television series called Missing America devoted an episode to what it called the Maple Falls Mystery. The producers had read about the case in a forgotten archive and wanted to tell the story again with modern eyes. For a week, crews filmed interviews in the park, along Main Street, and inside the courthouse basement where the original files were stored. The episode aired on a Sunday night, and for the first time in decades, the people of Maple Falls gathered around their televisions to hear their own history told back to them. The show was simple. Narrated without sensationalism, it reconstructed the timeline, showed photographs of Ethan Miller and Michael Turner, and displayed the age-progressed images created by the FBI in 2008. Then it ended with the same question the police had once asked. If someone took them, where are they now? Within days, the county sheriff's office received dozens of calls and emails. Some were from as far away as Oregon or Florida, people who thought they might have gone to school with someone who resembled Ethan. Others sent letters, handwritten, shaky, hopeful, saying they remembered seeing a young mother with two boys who didn't speak much at a rest stop in the early 1980s. Most tips led nowhere, but the response reminded everyone that even after 40 years, strangers still cared. For the families, the renewed attention stirred old emotions. Karen Miller, now 72, lived in a small retirement community outside Columbus. She no longer gave interviews, but when the show aired, her daughter, Ethan's half-sister, recorded her watching it. In the clip, Karen sits quietly, her hands folded on her lap, eyes fixed on the screen as the narrator describes the park, the bear, the day that never ended. When the program fades to black, she reaches into the glass cabinet beside her chair and touches the edge of a small, faded teddy bear. Rusty. Its fur has thinned, the stitching has loosened, but it remains intact, sealed behind the glass. I keep him safe, she tells her daughter softly, until Ethan can come for him. Back in Maple Falls, Linda Turner was still there, still teaching part-time at the elementary school. At 70, her hair had turned white, but her voice in the classroom remained gentle and precise. She taught reading to first graders, the same age group she'd taught before 1978. When a journalist asked why she continued working after all these years, she smiled and said, "Every September I see new faces, and sometimes, just for a moment, I think, maybe he would have smiled like that too." Linda rarely spoke publicly about Michael anymore, but people noticed that on the second day of September each year, she still visited the park with a small bouquet of wild daisies, placing them under the maple tree near the old sandbox. The flowers never stayed long. Children or wind usually scattered them by nightfall. Still, the act itself became part of the town's rhythm, as steady as the seasons. After the Missing America broadcast, the Maple County Board voted to create a small memorial in the park. 2 new stone benches were placed beneath the trees, their backs carved with the names Ethan Miller and Michael Turner, followed by the same date, summer 1978. Between them, a bronze plaque was set into the ground. It read, "To remember the 2 boys who disappeared, and to remind us that truth must never be forgotten." On warm evenings, people often sit there, teenagers with ice cream cups, elderly couples on their walks, parents watching their children play. The benches have become part of the scenery, ordinary yet sacred, a quiet space that holds a town's memory. The park itself has changed in small ways. The sandbox is gone, replaced by rubber mats and bright equipment that meets modern safety codes. A security camera now stands on the light pole nearest the gate. But if you look closely, the air around the place still feels heavier than anywhere else in Maple Falls, as though the past hasn't quite let go. In the sheriff's office, a younger generation of investigators keeps the case files in digital form. The old paper folders, creased, yellowed, fragile, are stored in archival boxes marked historical evidence. Once a year, someone opens them, usually a new recruit, and reads the original reports written by Chief Cole in his neat, slanted handwriting. The officers say it feels like visiting a memorial, an act of respect more than hope. Occasionally, tips still arrive. One came in 2016 from a man claiming to have known a boy named Ethan in a foster home near St. Paul, Minnesota in the early 1980s. Another arrived in 2019, describing a silver wristwatch with the initials EM seen at an antique shop. Each was investigated, and each ended in silence. But even those dead ends serve a purpose. They keep the story alive, forcing people to remember that it isn't finished. In private conversations, the townspeople still speak about the case in the present tense. "Those boys are out there somewhere," they say. "They just don't know where home is." It's not a statement of fact. It's a choice of faith, the kind small towns learn to make when facts have run out. On a cool evening in the fall of 2020, a candlelight vigil was held at the park. The air smelled of dry leaves and wood smoke. Someone read aloud from a letter that Linda had written years earlier but never published. It said, "If my son is alive, I want him to know I forgave whoever took him a long time ago. Not because they deserve it, but because I can't spend the rest of my life being angry. I want to believe he found kindness somewhere, even if it wasn't with me." When the reading ended, people placed small candles along the benches until the glow formed a soft semicircle of light beneath the trees. From a distance, it looked like the park itself was breathing again. Later that night, when most had gone home, a police officer on patrol stopped his car at the corner of Main and Park Street. The lights were still burning under the maples. He didn't get out. He simply watched for a moment, then whispered the same words many in Maple Falls have said quietly for 40 years. "Wherever you are, the light's still on." The story of the two boys has no ending, no justice, no last-minute revelation. It has only the endurance of memory and the people who refuse to let it die. Some believe the children were taken far away, given new names, and grew up never knowing where they came from. Others think the truth lies closer, buried in the silence of a town that keeps too many secrets. Whatever the answer, the park remains, a place where loss has turned into remembrance, where fear has slowly become faith. On clear autumn mornings, when sunlight filters through the red leaves, the names on the stone benches gleam softly, catching the light just so. And somewhere in that gentle glow lies the final thought of the story, one that Maple Falls has carried for 4 long decades. If those boys are still alive somewhere, they may not know it, but an entire town is still waiting for them to come home. If you believe that every story deserves an ending, please subscribe to this channel and share this video. Each view, each comment, keeps the light in Maple Falls burning, a reminder that truth can fade, but it should never disappear.